Here's something that doesn't add up for a lot of people. You got the raise, you landed the better job, your salary finally hit a number that felt like it should have changed everything. And somehow you're still checking your account balance before you buy groceries. Still stressed the week before payday. Still wondering where it all went. If that sounds familiar, I need you to hear this. It's not because you're bad with money. It's because almost nobody warns you about what actually happens to your finances the moment your income goes up. Today, I want to walk through exactly why a good salary doesn't automatically fix your money problems, the 5 specific traps that quietly eat a bigger paycheck, and what to actually do about it. And stick with me, because trap number 3 is the one that catches almost everyone, even people who think they're already doing everything right. Let's start with something that might be uncomfortable to hear, but it needs saying up front because the rest of this video won't make sense without it. Income and wealth are not the same thing, and treating them like they are is basically the root of this entire problem. You can earn a genuinely impressive salary and still have almost nothing to show for it 5 or 10 years down the line, because a bigger number landing in your account every month doesn't automatically translate into a bigger number sitting in your savings or your investments. What determines that second number has almost nothing to do with your salary and everything, to do with what happens to the money after it arrives. Here's a stat that tends to surprise people the first time they hear it. Plenty of people earning 6 figures are living essentially paycheck to paycheck, with barely more saved than someone earning half their income. It's not rare. It's actually a pretty well-documented pattern, and once you understand why it happens, it stops being surprising at all. There's actually a name researchers sometimes use for this specific situation, being Henry, which stands for high earner, not rich yet. It describes exactly the person this video is for. Someone whose income on paper looks like success, but whose actual bank balance, savings, and investments tell a completely different story. The uncomfortable truth is that this isn't some rare edge case. It's common enough that financial researchers gave it its own label, which tells you something about how widespread this specific gap between income and wealth actually is. Let's get into the 5 specific traps, because these are the actual mechanics behind why a bigger paycheck so often doesn't translate into bigger wealth. The first trap is lifestyle inflation, and this one's talked about a lot but rarely explained in a way that actually helps. It's not just you spend more when you earn more. That part everyone already knows. The real problem is how automatic and invisible it is. You get a raise, and within a few months, without any single big decision, your rent creeps up because you move somewhere nicer. Your car payment goes up because you upgrade. Your grocery bill goes up because you stop checking prices as carefully. Your subscriptions multiply because a few extra dollars a month doesn't feel like anything anymore. None of these individually feel like a big deal. Add them all up, and most people find they're spending nearly every extra dollar their raise gave them, sometimes more, without ever consciously deciding to do that. What makes lifestyle inflation so hard to catch in the moment is that each individual upgrade genuinely feels earned. You worked for the raise, so a nicer apartment feels like a fair trade. The problem isn't any single upgrade. It's that these upgrades tend to happen in a cluster right after every income increase, absorbing the entire raise before you've had any real chance to decide whether that's actually how you wanted to use it. The second trap is what you could call proof spending, buying things, specifically because you finally can, as a kind of internal proof that the hard work paid off. This one's sneaky because it feels completely justified in the moment. You worked hard for that promotion, so you deserve the nicer car. You finally hit that salary number, so you deserve the bigger apartment. There's nothing wrong with enjoying money you've earned. That's genuinely part of the point of earning it. The problem is when almost every single raise gets absorbed entirely by this kind of spending, because then the raise never actually builds anything. It just becomes a slightly nicer version of the exact same paycheck-to-paycheck cycle you were in before, just at a higher price point. Proof spending tends to show up most strongly right after a specific milestone. A promotion, a new job title hitting a salary number that felt significant. There's a real psychological pull to mark that moment with something tangible. And while that's a completely human impulse, it becomes a genuine problem when it happens every single time income increases, with nothing ever actually making it into savings as a result. The third trap, and this is the one that catches almost everyone, is invisible fixed costs that quietly scale with your income without you ever making an active decision about them. This is different from lifestyle inflation because it's not really about conscious spending choices. It's about the specific way certain expenses attach themselves to your income level almost automatically. Higher income often means a bigger apartment or house, which means higher utilities, higher insurance, higher property taxes if you own. It often means a nicer car, which means higher insurance and higher maintenance costs. It often means a different social circle, where the normal price of dinner out or a weekend trip is quietly higher than what you were used to before. None of these show up as one obvious decision you made. They accumulate as a kind of background tax on a higher income that most people never actually sit down and calculate. What makes this specific trap so dangerous compared to the first two is that it doesn't even require any deliberate spending decision at all. You didn't choose to pay more for insurance. Your car got nicer, so the insurance quote came back higher automatically. You didn't choose to pay more in property taxes. Your home value went up, so the bill increased on its own. This is exactly why so many people insist they haven't changed their spending habits at all, and genuinely believe that, while their actual monthly expenses have still climbed significantly alongside their income. The fourth trap is debt that grew alongside your income, especially the kind that felt manageable at the time because your income could technically cover the payment. A car loan, a larger mortgage, credit card balances that crept up during a leaner period and never quite got paid off. These don't feel dangerous when your income is strong enough to cover the minimum payments comfortably. But covering the minimum payment and actually building wealth are two completely different things. Debt payments on things that don't grow in value are money leaving your life permanently. With interest and a strong income makes this trap easier to fall into precisely because it removes the immediate pain that would normally force you to deal with it. There's an almost counterintuitive pattern here worth pointing out. A higher income can actually make debt more dangerous, not less. Specifically because it removes the urgency to address it. Someone earning less who's carrying debt often feels the pressure immediately and is forced to deal with it. Someone earning significantly more can comfortably absorb the minimum payments for years without ever feeling that same pressure, which means the debt just sits there quietly accumulating interest, treated as a permanent fixture of the budget rather than something actively being paid down. And the fifth trap, maybe the most important one, is simply never automating savings in the first place, regardless of income level. This sounds almost too simple to be a real trap, but it's genuinely one of the biggest reasons a good salary doesn't turn into real wealth. If saving only happens with whatever's left over at the end of the month, and lifestyle inflation, proof spending, invisible fixed costs, and debt payments have already claimed most of the increase, there's rarely much left over at all, regardless of how much the actual salary number went up. A higher income without a system for automatically converting part of it into savings just means a higher amount of money passing through your hands before disappearing, rather than a higher amount actually staying. This trap connects directly back to the other four, because it's really the missing safeguard that would have prevented most of the damage from the other traps in the first place. If a portion of every raise was automatically diverted into savings the moment it arrived, lifestyle inflation and proof spending would have far less room to expand into, simply because the money wouldn't be sitting there available to spend in the first place. Now here's the part that really matters. Why does this keep happening even to people who genuinely aren't reckless with money, who consider themselves responsible, who would never describe themselves as someone with a spending problem? The honest answer is that none of these traps require you to be careless. They require you to simply not have a specific system in place, because in the absence of a system, your spending naturally rises to meet your income, almost like water finding its level. This isn't a character flaw. It's just what happens by default when nothing is actively directing where a raise goes, and it happens to disciplined, thoughtful people just as often as it happens to anyone else. Because willpower alone was never actually the thing standing between a raise and real wealth in the first place. There's also a psychological piece worth understanding here, because it explains why this feels so hard to notice while it's happening. Every individual spending decision in isolation usually feels completely reasonable. Upgrading your apartment when you get a raise feels reasonable. A nicer car feels reasonable. A few more subscriptions feel reasonable. It's only when you zoom out and look at the sum of all these individually reasonable decisions that the pattern becomes obvious, and most people never actually zoom out far enough to see it, because there's no single moment where it feels like a mistake is being made. This is also exactly why simply telling someone to spend less almost never works as advice. Nobody consciously experiences themselves as overspending in any single moment. The problem only becomes visible in aggregate, across many small decisions spread out over months or years, which is precisely why a system that operates automatically before spending decisions even get made works so much better than relying on willpower or awareness alone to catch the pattern after the fact. Let's talk about what actually breaks this cycle, because understanding the traps is only half of this video. The other half is a real, practical plan for making sure your next raise doesn't just quietly disappear the same way the last one did. The first fix, and genuinely the most important one, is deciding in advance what happens to any future raise before it even arrives. This is different from deciding after the fact, once the money's already sitting in your account and lifestyle inflation has had a chance to quietly claim it. A simple, effective rule a lot of people use is splitting every raise roughly in half. Half goes toward lifestyle, so you genuinely get to enjoy the fact that you're earning more, and half goes straight into savings or investments before you ever get used to having it as spendable income. This single decision, made once ahead of time, does more to prevent lifestyle inflation than almost any amount of after-the-fact budgeting ever could. The reason timing matters so much here is that once a raise has been sitting in your account for even a couple of months, your brain has already started treating it as your new normal baseline. Deciding what happens to it before that adjustment sets in is dramatically easier than trying to claw back spending after your lifestyle has already quietly expanded. To match it, the second fix is automating that split the moment the raise takes effect, rather than relying on willpower to manually move money every single month. Set up an automatic transfer that moves straight to savings or investments the day your paycheck lands, calculated using your new, higher income. This does for a raise exactly what automating savings does for any income level. It removes the decision entirely, so the money is gone from your spendable balance before your lifestyle has any chance to quietly expand around it. The third fix is calculating your actual invisible fixed costs at least once a year, since these tend to creep up silently otherwise. Sit down and add up your total housing costs, insurance, utilities, and any other cost that scales with your general lifestyle level, and compare that total to what it was a year or two ago, relative to your income at each point. This exercise alone tends to be eye-opening, because it often reveals that a meaningful chunk of a raise has already been absorbed by costs you never consciously decided to increase. They just rose quietly in the background while your attention was somewhere else. The fourth fix is tackling any debt that's been coasting along at a manageable payment, using at least part of any raise specifically for extra payments rather than letting it all flow into lifestyle. This matters more than it might seem, because debt sitting at a comfortable minimum payment for years is often costing far more in total interest than most people realize, simply because it's never uncomfortable enough to actually force a decision. Directing a portion of every raise specifically toward accelerating debt payoff turns a raise into something that actually improves your financial position long-term, rather than something that just raises your monthly obligations right alongside your monthly income. The fifth fix is recalculating your savings rate as a percentage, not a dollar amount every time your income changes. If you're currently saving $300 a month on a $4,000 monthly income, that's a meaningfully different situation than saving that same $300 a month once your income rises to $6,000. The dollar amount staying flat while the percentage quietly shrinks is one of the most common, least noticed ways a raise ends up producing zero actual improvement in your long-term financial position. Recalculating this percentage with every raise and deliberately increasing it rather than letting it drift downward is what actually converts income growth into wealth growth over time. Let's walk through a real example, so this feels concrete instead of abstract. Say you're earning $60,000 a year and saving $400 a month, which works out to an 8% savings rate. You get a raise, and your income jumps to $75,000. If your monthly savings stays at that same $400, your savings rate has actually dropped to a little over 6%, even though your income went up by 25%. Meanwhile, if you'd applied the 50-50 split we talked about earlier, you'd be saving somewhere closer to $650 a month instead, which would keep your savings rate climbing rather than quietly shrinking, all while you still get to enjoy roughly $250 a month in genuine lifestyle upgrade from that same raise. Notice what happened in that second scenario. Nothing about it required extreme discipline or giving up. Meaningful enjoyment of the raise. You still got a real noticeable lifestyle bump. The only difference is that the decision about where the money went was made deliberately, ahead. Let's also cover a few mistakes people tend to make once they actually try implementing fixes like this, because a couple of small missteps can make the whole plan feel like it's not working. The first mistake is trying to apply this system entirely retroactively, meaning attempting to claw back lifestyle spending that's already deeply established all at once. This usually backfires. It's genuinely easier and far more sustainable to apply the 50-50 split going forward to any new income increase, rather than trying to dramatically cut an already established lifestyle overnight. Going forward is a much lower friction fix than going backward. The second mistake is treating this as a one-time fix rather than an ongoing habit tied to every future raise. A single successful 50-50 split on one raise is genuinely great. But if the next raise a year or two later goes entirely toward lifestyle without the same intentional split, the whole benefit unwinds over time. This needs to become the default response to every future increase in income, not a one-time correction. The third mistake is confusing frugality with the actual goal here. This isn't about refusing to enjoy a higher income at all. That's neither realistic nor the point. It's about making sure that as your income grows, your wealth actually grows alongside it, rather than your lifestyle simply expanding to consume the entire increase every single time. Genuinely enjoying part of every raise is built directly into this system, not something you're supposed to feel guilty about. The fourth mistake is ignoring the invisible fixed costs conversation entirely and only focusing on obvious discretionary lifestyle spending. A lot of people cut back on dining out or subscriptions, feel like they've solved the problem, and never actually notice that their housing costs, insurance, or other background expenses have quietly scaled up right alongside their income, eating a much bigger chunk of any raise than the discretionary spending ever did. Let's address a question that comes up a lot with this specific topic. What if you're already deep into lifestyle inflation, with fixed costs that are genuinely difficult to reduce quickly, like a lease you're locked into or a mortgage you can't easily change? In that situation, the 50-50 split still works, just applied going forward from this exact point, rather than trying to retroactively fix costs that are currently locked in. The goal isn't to fix everything overnight. It's to make sure the pattern stops repeating with every future raise, while gradually addressing the locked-in costs as natural opportunities arise: a lease renewal, a refinance, a chance to renegotiate a bill. Another common question is whether this applies the same way to windfalls, like a bonus or a tax refund, as it does to an ongoing salary increase. The honest answer is that windfalls are actually easier to protect, specifically because they don't become part of your regular monthly budget the way a salary increase does. The same 50-50 principle works well here too, though some people prefer an even more aggressive split for one-time windfalls specifically, since there's no ongoing lifestyle expectation attached to a single bonus the way there is to a permanent raise. A tax refund or year-end bonus that shows up once and disappears back into your regular checking account tends to get spent almost thoughtlessly, precisely because it never had a chance to feel like real income in the first place. Treating it with even more intention than a regular raise rather than less tends to produce noticeably better results over time. People also ask whether this system still applies once someone is already earning a genuinely high income. well beyond what most people would consider comfortable. The pattern actually tends to get worse, not better, at higher income levels, because the absolute dollar amounts involved in lifestyle inflation get so much larger that they're easier to justify individually, even though the underlying mechanic is identical. A $500 increase in monthly housing costs feels almost invisible against a six-figure income, the same way a $50 increase felt invisible against a much smaller one. The trap doesn't disappear with a bigger salary. It just gets better at hiding in plain sight. Let's put together an actual plan for applying all of this, starting now rather than waiting for some future raise that hasn't happened yet. This week, calculate your current actual savings rate as a percentage of your income, not just a dollar amount. If you don't currently have a clear number, this alone is worth doing regardless of anything else in this video. Next, decide right now in advance what your 50-50 split will look like the next time your income increases, whether that's a raise, a bonus, a new job, or any other bump. Write it down somewhere you'll actually remember it, so the decision is already made before the money ever shows up. Then, sit down and calculate your actual invisible fixed costs, total housing, insurance, and utilities as a percentage of your current income, and compare that to what it likely was a year or two ago. This single exercise tends to reveal exactly where a chunk of previous raises quietly disappeared to. If you're carrying debt that's been coasting at a comfortable minimum payment, calculate roughly how much total interest that debt is actually costing you over its remaining life. Seeing that real number tends to be the push most people need to start directing. Part of future income increases specifically toward paying it down faster. And finally, set a recurring reminder to revisit your savings rate every time your income changes going forward, rather than letting it silently drift for years without ever being recalculated. Let's recap everything we covered today. Earning more doesn't automatically build wealth, because 5 specific traps quietly absorb most raises before they ever reach your savings. Lifestyle inflation, proof spending, invisible fixed costs that scale with your income, debt that grew alongside your paycheck, and simply never automating your savings in the first place. The real fix isn't willpower. It's deciding in advance what happens to every future raise, automating that decision the moment it takes effect, and tracking your savings as a percentage of income rather than a fixed dollar amount that quietly loses ground every time your income grows. Remember this: a good salary is genuinely an advantage, but it's not a solution on its own. It's simply raw material. What actually determines whether that raw material turns into real, lasting wealth is the system sitting underneath it. And that system is something you can build starting with your very next paycheck, regardless of what your income looks like right now. The people who eventually turn a good salary into real wealth aren't necessarily the ones who earn the most. They're the ones who put a specific system in place before the money ever had a chance to quietly disappear. If this video actually helped you see your own situation a little more clearly, hit that like button and subscribe, because we cover practical, real-world money content exactly like this every single week. Drop a comment and let me know which of these 5 traps hit closest to home for you. I'd genuinely like to know which one people relate to the most, because in my experience, it's rarely the one people expect going in. Most people assume it's lifestyle inflation. But invisible fixed costs and never automating savings tend to be the quieter, more common culprits once people actually sit down and look closely at their own numbers. In the next video, we're covering exactly how to calculate your own personal savings rate step by step, and what a genuinely healthy target actually looks like depending on your specific situation, age, and goals. So make sure you hit that bell icon so you don't miss it. See you in the next one.